Hello YouTube. So in February of 1997, the world learned about the first successful cloning of a mammal. This became Dolly the sheep. She was born 7 months earlier, but before receiving a patent, her birth was kept secret. We will talk about what cloning has achieved in a quarter of a century, whether it is possible to eat the meat of cloned animals, when mammoths and dinosaurs return to Earth, and whether human cloning will begin soon. We'll talk about some of the things now, some of them later, but what I wanted to say today is if we don't have enough troubles in the world today, now the Chinese are ready to pay $3 million for the new Stalin. Joseph Vissarionovich Stalin, born Iosip Djugashvili, was a Georgian revolutionary and the Soviet political leader who governed the Soviet Union from 1922 until his death in 1953. He held power as the General Secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union and as a chairman of the Council of Ministers of the Soviet Union. All this just to say that he ultimately consolidated power to become the Soviet dictator by the 1930s. He was a communist, ideologically committed to the Leninist interpretation of Marxism. He's formalized his ideas of Marxism-Leninism, which we had to study in the Soviet schools, and they bashed it into our heads non-stop. And then his policies were also known as Stalinism. Look, he caused immense grief for countless Soviet families, and his policies of terror are responsible for millions of deaths in my native Ukraine, in Russia, in Georgia, and so forth. Look, in February 2022, the media reported that China had expressed a desire to acquire Stalin's DNA, not only for genetic research, but also with the aim of cloning the leader in the future when it becomes possible. This is unbelievable. I mean, with everything else that's coming from China, now we need this. Daniel Feng, a former Hong Kong prosecutor and now prominent representative of the influential northeastern clan of billionaire communists from Beijing, approached Stalin's great-grandson, artist Selim Ben Saad, with such a proposal. This in particular was reported by the press attaché to the heir of Stalin. At the same time, the Chinese communists are not only ready to pay all the costs of exhuming Stalin and analyzing his DNA, but also offer $3 million for the legal consent of relatives for cloning. The nearest relative of Joseph Stalin, his grandson, Selim Ben Saad, requires the exhumation of the remains of the former head of the Soviet state. Ben Saad's representative stated that in this way he intends to perform the will of the famous great-grandfather. Selim Ben Saad is the grandson of the son of Stalin, Yakov Djugashvili, who during the World War II period was captured and died in the Nazi Sachsenhausen concentration camp. Selim Ben Saad was born from the union of his daughter Galina Djugashvili and a citizen of Algeria, Hoshina Ben Saad, while Judith or Yulia Yudif Isakovna Meltzer was a Jewish Ukrainian ballerina. She was the wife of Yakov Djugashvili and the daughter-in-law of Joseph Stalin. She was the mother of Stalin's granddaughter, translator Galina Djugashvili. While Selim Ben Saad is confused, on the one hand, Stalin is buried in a necropolis near the Kremlin wall, and his exhumation will require permission from the state level. The heir is also confused by the fact that human cloning is currently prohibited, and the export of human biomaterial from the country, including DNA, is strictly regulated by the state, by the Russian state. On the other hand, Selim is poor. He is hearing impaired, In addition, he has a conflict with his father, a native of Algeria, Hossein Ben Saad, who evicted him from his parents' apartments once given to ballerina Yulia Meltzer, whom I mentioned was the second wife of his son Yakov, and grandmother to Selim. And the great-grandson of the leader needs money very much now. It's like a soap opera. Anyway, the word clone in Greek means twig, escape. Initially, this was the name of new plants that developed from the shoots of the progenitor plant and completely preserved its properties. For example, the basal shoots of an apple tree. In the animal world, natural clones are identical twins who have the same genetic characteristics, eye color, hair, blood type, etc. Biologists started creating copies of living beings artificially more than 100 years ago. The German researcher Hans Spemann was the first to succeed in this. In 1901, he divided the two-celled embryo of a salamander in half, and from each half he grew a full-fledged organism. I hope they don't clone two Stalins. Anyway, according to legend, he tied the cage in half with the thin hair of his newborn daughter. So scientists realized that everything you need to create a new creature is available in every cell of the embryo. In the first third of the 20th century, it was established that all the information necessary for the development of life is concentrated in the cell nucleus. And in 1948, the Soviet scientist Georgy Lapashov developed a method by which it became possible to transplant the cell nucleus of one organism into a nuclear-free egg cell of another. However, Lapashov's scientific work was not published. The persecution of geneticists began in the USSR. Scientists were purged, imprisoned, and killed. This is the way of socialism in my country. In 1962, British scientist John Gurdon created a spur frog using the nuclei of the tadpole cells and achieved the approximately 2% of eggs with a transparent nucleus they were able to develop into adults. A year later, describing this experience, biologist John Haldane first used the term clone. They became interested in cloning, seeing significant prospects in it. Carrots were born, which were grown from an isolated cage, then carp, mice, and two sheep, Megan and Morag. However, for cloning mammals in this experience, only embryonic cells were used. That is, cells obtained from fusion of an egg and sperm. The decisive step was taken in 1996. A group of embryologists from the Roslin Institute in Scotland, led by Ian Wilmot, cloned a sheep by taking the DNA from an ordinary somatic cell, namely from an udder cell. On July 5 of the same year, Dolly was born. So it was proved that the DNA of almost any adult cell can be used to create a completely new organism. 7 months later, on February 22, 1997, after Wilmot received the patent for cloning technology, the birth of Dolly the sheep was announced in the press and the media. It was a very difficult job. Scientists took an unfertilized egg from a Scottish black-faced sheep, DNA from a 6-year-old sheep from Fern Dorset, if I pronounce it right. 277 fertilized eggs were created, of which 29 embryos turned out. These embryos were implanted in 13 surrogate mothers at the age of 7 days, and only one pregnancy ended well. At first, the newborn lamb had no name. I think her name was 6LL3. By the number with which the test tube was marked. But then one of the veterinarians suggested calling her Dolly, Doll, in honor of the singer Dolly Parton. Dolly the sheep was no different from her relatives. She begged for treats, walked with other sheep, and gave birth to 6 healthy lambs. But despite the care and attention of veterinarians, she died early at 6.5 years old, despite the fact that on average sheep live 12 years. Dolly had to be put down because she developed a severe viral lung disease and arthritis. It is believed that this happened because Dolly was kept indoors and rarely taken out for a walk. Dolly the sheep is recognized as the most famous sheep in the history of science. Her effigy can now be seen in the Royal Museum of Scotland. But no matter how great Walmut's discovery was, it seriously scared people. After all, in the same way that Dolly was obtained, as it turned out, it's possible to clone any living being, including a human person. There will be consequences, moral and ethical. It is unlikely that everything will be limited to patents. States should regulate cloning issues. The politicians consider that, and the world listened to them. Dolly was cloned using a technique known as somatic cell nuclear transfer. The standard cloning procedure is as follows. Genetic material is taken from an adult cell and transplanted into an unfertilized egg taken from a female of the same species. Her own genetic material from the egg has been previously removed. After the fusion, the resulting egg is attached to the surrogate mother. She is carrying a fetus. Genetically, it will be identical to the donor from whose body cell the genetic material was taken. So already in 1998, 24 countries from 43 member countries of the Union of Europe signed an additional protocol to the Convention on the Protection of Human Rights and Human Dignity in connection with the use of biology and medicine, according to which human cloning is prohibited. In 2005, the UN member states adopted a declaration prohibiting all forms of human cloning. Russia adopted in 2002 the law on temporary ban on human cloning. Its preamble states that the ban is imposed based on the principles of respect for human beings, recognition of the value of the individual, the need to protect human rights and freedoms. As a scientific experiment, it makes sense if it will benefit a particular person, but if it's used all the time, there's nothing good about it. The Dalai Lama in 14, I think, also agrees. In most countries, criminal liability is provided for human cloning. In the United States, for example, it is 10 years in prison and a fine of $1 million. But scientific progress, as some call it, and I really dislike the word progress, because of what evils it brought to my country and all over the world. Anyway, they say it's unstoppable. Today, two types of cloning are used: therapeutic and reproductive. During therapeutic cloning, 14-day embryo consisting of stem cells is obtained from an egg and DNA, which are then used in scientific research or for the treatment of various diseases. Reproductive cloning, as a result of which a living being is born, is currently permissible only for the reproduction of animals. In the quarter of a century since Dolly was born, scientists have cloned 23 species of animals. Among them are camels, deer, coyotes, Arctic wolves, Pyrenean goats, and even fruit flies. Some individuals were brought out primarily from scientific excitement, so to say. For example, it was not possible to clone dogs for a very long time, since their eggs almost did not mature in an artificial environment. But in April of 2005, Snoopy, an Afghan greyhound, appeared at Seoul National University under the leadership of Professor Hwang Woo-seuk, the same one who retired from the fundamental medicine after the scandal with falsification of stem cell data, according to media. For the study, the DNA of a male isolated from an ear cell and I think 1,095 eggs from 122 canine females were needed. During the experiment, only 3 pregnancies were achieved. One of them ended in a miscarriage. The second puppy died shortly after birth. Only Snoopy survived, who was carried out by a golden female Labrador. He lived for 10 years, was healthy, and gave birth to 9 puppies, which were also obtained by cloning. There are no longer any technical obstacles to human cloning. The 2 directions in which cloning technology is currently developing are the reproduction of extinct animals and the creation of primate clones. The first extinct animal was cloned in 2009. It was the Pyrenean ibex, which was carried out by a female domestic goat. It took 439 embryos, 57 surrogate mothers, and only 1 pregnancy ended in childbirth. The cub lived for 7 minutes and died from a lung development defect. Nevertheless, scientists considered that the experiment was a success. The possibility of cloning extinct species was proven. Currently, biotechnologists are working on artificial reproduction of several ancient animals at once. Banteng, the wild bull from South Asia, marsupial wolf, Mauritian dodo, wandering pigeon, Przewalski's horse. The ultimate task is to clone a mammoth, and I've spoken about it in other videos. 2 groups of scientists are working on this at once. The geneticists of the American Institute of Colossal Biosciences, under the leadership of Professor George Church, Harvard Medical School, and the World Mammoth Center, which is being created in Yakutia, in Russia, in cooperation with the Artemy Bryagian Engineering. The difficulty is that biologists don't have the right DNA. So at the disposal of Russian scientists, there are the remains of the so-called Malolyakhovsky mammoth, found in 2013 in the ice on the island of Malolyakhovsky in the Russian Arctic. The carcass of the female mammoth was preserved so well that its tissues were soft and blood flowed from them. However, the researchers have not been able to find a single cell with an intact structure yet. According to them, the animal's DNA resembles printed text passed through a paper shredder. George Church and his team plan to go the other way, to recreate mammoth DNA by editing elephant genes. $15 million have already been allocated for this ambitious project, and scientists are sure that the first mammoth cubs will appear in 5 to 6 years. However, it is still unclear whether it will be possible to introduce genetic information into an elephant egg at all, and whether an elephant will be able to carry and give birth to a mammoth. Firstly, these are animals of different species, and secondly, artificial insemination of elephants has never been carried out. As for cloning primates, this has already happened. In January 2018, 2 female crab-eating macaques were born at the Primate Research Center and the Institute of Neurophysiology of the Chinese Academy of Sciences, under the guidance of molecular biologist Qiang Song. The cubs were named Zhongzhong and Huahua from the word Zhonghua, which means China, Chinese. It is believed that the cloning macaques will help scientists advance in testing drugs for deadly diseases, genome editing, and brain research, because the genetic code of monkeys is 93% the same as the human genetic code. The technical barrier that has long been an obstacle to cloning various primates, including humans, has been overcome. In principle, our technology can also be used for cloning people, but we're not going to do this, according to Kyung San, director of the Center for the Study of Primates. Well, the ban on human cloning, although adopted in most countries, is temporary. Whether it will be removed, time will tell. And, God forbid, our planet from the appearance of more Stalins and the like. Thank you for your attention to my work. If you can support my research, please see the links in the description to this video. Please subscribe to my channel.